All right, let's jump straight into it. Joining me now, foreign editor at the Australian newspaper, back for 2023, Greg Sheridan. Welcome, Greg. I'll start with all the issues around Australia Day. I mean, you travel enough, and there's no doubt when you go overseas, you realise we are blessed to live in the best country on earth. You and I have both travelled, been lucky enough to travel as much as we have. So why are an elite minority of activists, corporates and celebrities, I mean, the stuff on social media today is pretty horrific, trying to bully people from even posting a picture of the flag or their family out at a barbecue. Why are they trying to force Australia Day off the national calendar? The Prime Minister says he's got no mood to change it. The majority say they don't want it changed. Are they hoping they can just wear us down?
They sure are, Peter. And look, on the basis of what's happened in the past, they're probably right. They probably can just wear us down. You're right about travelling. I mean, everyone else in the world would love to live in Australia. I mean, they think we've got no problems at all. They think it's a fantastic place. And they know that it's the freest place in the world. Racial discrimination is illegal. We've had nearly 6 million migrants since World War II. We've gone from white Australia to the most racially diverse country in the world with no social disturbance. We have 1 million consultative bodies for Aboriginal Australians. We have 1 million gestures of respect and esteem for Aboriginal culture. Like all Australians, I esteem Aboriginal culture. But the elites in this country, including, sadly, the elites in some parts of the Aboriginal leadership, have come to hate our society. And of course, this is part of the general, it's very derivative, of course. We're just an imitation of what's happening in New York and Paris and London. It's absorbed in this pathetic, destructive, terrible dead end of identity politics, which is performative and never ending. So we could have a voice, a treaty and truth-telling commission and everything else tomorrow. That wouldn't be enough. It's never enough. Nothing is ever enough. No symbolism is ever sufficient, because they regard the type of society we are as inherently evil and wicked. Capitalist, sexist, heteronormative, whatever. And they've become enemies of our society and enemies of our history. And the tragedy is our political class, including the opposition and the government, won't defend Australian institutions and Australian history. I mean, Peter Dutton is still the only Australian I know who doesn't have a view on whether an in-principle segregation of Australians by race in the Constitution is a good thing or not. Anthony Albanese is an extremely nice bloke and very non-threatening. The Voice crowd are lucky to have him. But this is a terrible proposal that he's pushing.
I'll pick up that Voice issue today. The Prime Minister was very strong, almost strident about it at the end of the official ceremonies in Canberra when he hit the media. Let's have a listen.
If the referendum is not successful, I think people know that that will not be a moment that shows respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, that I think doesn't show the maturity of us as a nation, non-Indigenous Australia, of who we are, acknowledging the fullness and richness of our history, but also the way that we're perceived by the world.
Now, this is really wrong, Greg. It's blackmail. He's saying that we'll not be respectful, we'll not be mature, that we send a bad signal around the world. If the Voice fails, it'll fail because he's forcing it down our throats. It goes too far. It divides us by race. It's a wrong idea, but he's trying to make it all about us if Australians decide, when he eventually puts this up later in the year, that we don't want this. Even if we support, as I do, reconciliation by putting appropriate recognition of Aboriginal people in the Constitution. I've always supported that. I've supported that for decades. But I don't support a race-based body. I don't support a race-based electoral roll. Those things are an absolute anathema. He needs to wear the blame here if it fails, not Australians.
Well, that's right, Peter. But I think the whole thrust of all of the advocates of the Voice, including the Prime Minister, but even including those few Conservatives who support it, is to say that there is something morally wrong, degenerate, corrupt, wicked and ungenerous about anybody who chooses to vote no. Now, this country voted on recognition in the Constitution once before. In John Howard's preamble, we rejected it 70-30 from memory, and nobody took that as an insult to Aborigines. Our Constitution does not carry declarative statements of moral intent. We don't have statements like we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. We do things in a different way in Australia. Our tradition is sort of non-declarative, common sense, and the common law and equality through institutions and so on. Now, so I think recognition in the Constitution would be quite misplaced, but it would be much less bad than a racially determined voice, a racially determined institution with a racial franchise. I mean, how insane is this? Liberalism has struggled for 200 years to remove race from every element of civic identity and consciousness and status.
Absolutely.
And here we are injecting it back in. Utter madness. But what I think is very objectionable, I think even with the moral blackmail, the vote would be no if there was a fair debate. But there's an element of Cuba and North Korea about all this. You're not allowed to advocate for a no vote. It's not going to be financed, whereas in all previous referendums, a yes and a no case were financed. There's tax deductibility for the yes case. There's no tax deductibility for the no case. The government says it won't spend money, but it will rebut falsehoods. So anything that you and I have said tonight, the government would consider a falsehood. So they'll spend the taxes they collect out of our pocket to rebut our perfectly legitimate ideas. This was a proposal which was rejected in principle, quite rightly, by the Turnbull Cabinet, by Scott Morrison. It's rejected by John Howard, and yet somehow or other, it's illegitimate, it's wicked, it's almost a crime. You could almost be locked up for voting no. This is a terrible wrong turn for Australian democracy.
I want to remind people, back in June, Senator Jacinta Price said if you take away these alcohol bans, you talked also about the cashless debit card, you'll open the floodgates, alcohol will be back in vulnerable communities, rates of domestic violence, she says, and sexual abuse will skyrocket. Well, she's not wrong. She's absolutely been proven right. Some people are out there, like Linda Burney, saying, well, if we had a voice, this wouldn't have happened, which is absolute rubbish. But Marion Scrimshaw, the Lower House Labor MP, she was spot on the money bravely today, dealing with the issue of racism, or claims that alcohol bans are racist. Have a listen.
Do you think it was a race-based policy?
No. Look, I think that what people have to get away from, that this is race-based. It becomes race-based when there's inaction, Matt. When people don't do what they should be doing, it becomes race-based. And we need to make sure that this is a community issue. And the Northern Territory Government has to step up here.
I'm a huge fan of her in recent weeks. She has really come into her own, Greg. But what she's saying there is, after the calls from the community, women in particular, to put these bans back in place, not putting them back in place and saying that if they did that, it was racist. She says, no, not saving us, not protecting women and children is what's racist. I think she's extraordinary.
Well, I agree. That's a very brave thing for a Labor politician to say, and God bless her and good on her, and I'm inspired by her. But look, she's the federal member of parliament for that area. Jacinta Price is the federal senator for the Northern Territory who lives in Alice Springs. Those two powerful, brave, decent Aboriginal women said, keep the grog bans, keep the cash limited welfare cards so that mums can get some food for themselves and their kids, as well as dads taking all the money for booze. And the left-wing leaders of the Northern Territory government and of the Labor Party in Canberra rejected them out of hand. So being left-wing was more important than two Aboriginal women elected by all of their constituents to represent
so I'm just going to jump in
area.
there. So it's not having an Aboriginal voice. It's the voices they want to listen to that matter, not the colour of their skin. That's what it comes down to.
Well, that's right. If you ignore the voices of Marion Scrimshaw and Jacinta Price with their democratic credentials, why on earth do you think that a voice, Matt Cunningham made that point through the week, under the Karma-Langton proposals, there'd be 2 representatives on the 24-member voice from the ACT, which has 7,000 Aboriginal Australians, and 3 from the Northern Territory, which has 75,000. What would Aboriginal activists in Melbourne or Canberra, what special insight would they have into Alice Springs? The whole thing is just a complete nonsense. There's not one speck of logic to it. The voice would have no effect on these problems, or if it did have an effect, it would probably be a bad effect because it will be led, like, you know, other government-appointed bodies, by unelected elites or by elites elected by activists, where you've got two democratic politicians who've won real elections, who represent the people on the ground, and the government, state and your territory and federal level couldn't give a tinker's cuss what they say.
All right, let's go to a country where they're bravely fighting to keep their borders secure against Russia. Good news overnight in the Bundestag. Germany has finally relented on the use of Leopard tanks, built in Germany obviously, but now on-sold to places like Poland, to go into Ukraine. Poland wants to send them in. The Germans were barring it. But the Germans will also now contribute some tanks to the Ukraine fight, we're told. The US as well, with Abrams tanks. What can you tell us and what do you make of it?
Well, I think it's a very good move indeed. So the Germans, I think, were too slow, but fair dues to the Germans in a way. They're led by the Social Democrats. Their government's led by the Social Democrats with Green coalition partner, and they are the third biggest weapons donator to Ukraine after the US and Britain. And the Leopard tanks are more useful to the Ukrainians than the Abrams because the Abrams are a bit hard to operate and they're very heavy. By the way, I would donate our 60-odd Abrams tanks tomorrow. The Ukrainians can have them all. They are absolutely useless for Australia. We haven't used a tank in any context since the Vietnam War, so for more than 50 years. But of course, Ukraine is not an island like us with maritime challenges. It has big open plains, big and long land borders with Russia and Belarus, so tanks are very useful to it. But I think this all also symbolises that the West is hanging together. Its strong commitment to the Ukrainians did not wane over the European winter with its Russian fuel shortages. You know, Biden is doddery. He's not my ideal president, but he's done all the right things so far. Every new category of weapons has come to the Ukrainians. I think it's been a bit slow, but still, you know, the Patriot missiles and now the tanks, I think they probably will get, if Russia keeps on with these atrocities, the Ukrainians will get jet fighters and more missiles. And this is not the West being provocative to Russia. For goodness sake, Russia invaded a peaceful, sovereign, democratic country. They're the guys who've been provocative. And I think this is a very good day for Ukraine. And because it strengthens the US alliance system, it's a very good day for Australia too.
Greg Sheridan, thank you.